Momocon. It's Atlanta's answer to Comic-Con. You won't want to miss it.
All right, everyone, we're going to get started with our next Momocon interview. We have Mark with, that you may know him from the Percy Jackson series. He's got to work on the last two books of the series, and he has several other books that he's involved with. So we're going to hand it off to our audience. First question from the audience.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mark from Blurredography. My first question to you is, how important is it to tell queer stories in today's?
We are starting. I love this. It's important for me to tell queer stories for a very selfish reason. And I do, when I'm starting a new project, starting a new book for kids, I'm thinking of middle school me, high school me. Here was this kid who was in the closet, who hung out in the library all the time, who was best friends with their English teachers, who just wanted one story, period. Just anything that talked about what I was going through. And I'll add to that also being Latino. And I was lucky enough to have teachers in high school who assigned us books with Latino characters, with Black characters, with Asian characters, because I know so many other kids who grew up with only an all-white canon. Nothing, even in my case, it wasn't until I was 14 years old, my English teacher freshman year assigned us The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. Changed my whole life because it was the first time that I was like, not only are we in books, but we're allowed to write this. I can do this. Like, I can write like this, and I can write these kind of stories. So yeah, I always think it's important both for myself and the art that I create, but then also thinking about the kids now who need those type of stories, thinking about the kids who also maybe don't need those stories necessarily, but have never read a story like that. And I think the beauty of a book is being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes for the first time. And so, it's going to sound weird to say it this way, but some of my favorite responses to some of my books are from straight readers who are like, wow, I've never thought of this, of life this way. I've never thought of experiencing high school this way. I've never thought of experiencing middle school this way. And I love that chance to just allow someone to peer in on a life that they haven't lived and get to understand someone better.
What is your creative process when planning out a story?
Yeah, I've been very lucky in that it only took one book for me to figure out my creative process. So when I have an idea, I like to just open a blank document and talk to myself. So if we're thinking of an idea now, like even right now, I've had an idea sitting in my head about doing a horror novel set at the start of a press junket where something happens and then everyone gets stuck in the room. This is a genuine idea. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but normally what I would do is open a blank document and be like, why? What I'm saying aloud, by the way, is what I'm writing. Why is this compelling to me? Why am I interested? Why have I thought about this idea for literally years? As I start thinking about it, I just write to myself, free, just sort of like open, very stream of consciousness. Who is the most interesting person that this idea could happen to? And once I get a sense that there is a nebulous story there, I don't need details, I then write an outline. So I'm an outliner. I like to plan a book out in advance. I will figure out not just the scenes, the names of everyone, because I will spend 6 hours on Facebook looking for a name. And I would rather get that done during the outlining stage than trying to draft and then getting stuck for like 6 hours. The most important part for me, though, is in the outlining, I need to figure out the ending. And then I just spent like a week and a half in New York City doing a bunch of school visits. Every single time I told the kids this, it blew their minds. I start all of my books by writing the last sentence first. And then I write the whole book to meet that last sentence. For me, it's an anchor. This is the emotional core. This is where I want the story to end up. But it also helps me when I get writer's block. That even with all the planning, I still get writer's block where I get stuck. I'm not sure I've made the right decision. I will go to that last sentence and read it again and remind myself of where I want this story to end up. And I feel lucky, or maybe it is just good writing. I've never had to change the last sentence of a book in all of my published ones, the 2 that are forthcoming. So that's generally my process is brainstorming, outlining, and then I will write the last sentence, draft a book to meet that last sentence. Thank you. That's a cool question. Yes.
That brings me to another question. In my experience interviewing and working and talking with authors, there's always this fight, if you will, between the editor, the publisher, the author about this version, this revision. Is there anything that you've had to fight for in some of your books that you're glad that it stayed?
this is where I get to review how lucky I am. And I think, well, let me also say it's not all luck. I'm very particular with my agent and I when we are choosing who to send books to. I have never had to fight for anything in a book, including some stuff where I put in a book and was like, this will never survive. And I will actually add Disney and Percy Jackson. Uh, Never, not once. There have been times where an editor has asked me to cut something out, and then I look at it and I'm like, that you're right. I don't need that. That's extraneous. It's not helping the plot. I've been very lucky, particularly in the young adult space and with the Percy Jackson book, in getting to push boundaries a lot of the times. I find a lot of people, both adults and kids, who have a sense of what is allowed in a book for kids, and then they read one of my books and they're like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could talk about that. I didn't know you could say that. I didn't know you could have thoughts like that. And I'm very lucky that I have editors who trust me while also they do push me. Because here's the other thing is while I say that I've never had to fight for anything, in particular, I will say this, Into the Light, my fantasy book, Each of Us a Desert, I had to rewrite multiple times. So it means I changed everything. Like everything got taken out and it got turned into a different story. But even in that, I trust that the editor sees something that maybe I can't see, and I'll always at least give it a try. But I don't think there's ever been anything in any of my novels, or even, oh no, wait, I did think of an answer. Never mind. Hold, there was one time in a short story where actually it was for a YA story. The kids were 18, and I mentioned that they used an app to meet, and the editor was like, "No, you're not allowed to do that." And it was the only concession where I was like, "All right, I think maybe that unlocks a can of worms that people might think of." So that was the one time, but I did push back on that, and then ultimately was like, "It's not as important." So I just said that they met on Instagram instead. Like, because the idea was they had never met in person before, and like, how do kids navigate a world of how weird the internet is?
Yeah.
It was a story about someone getting catfished. So I thought using an app that they met on and not saying what it was appropriate. And so ultimately, if it doesn't change the story, I was okay with it, but I did push back on that one. But otherwise, no, I've been very lucky in that I've been supported in my artistic vision throughout my career. Yes.
And with your writing, why do you feel novels is the best way to the best medium to convey your stories versus say any other form medium, comics, video, anything like that?
So we get to see me not having thought of why. I don't think I've ever been asked that. I like novels because a novel is a commitment from both the writer and the reader in a way that a lot of other forms are not. I think the closest you might get to it is long form television, where you have a serialized television show where you're committing to like 20 episodes and you're going to trust the journey that you're going on to. I think that also the case with some comics. I think I haven't pursued television or comics because I'm not quite as visually minded. And I have attempted a graphic novel outline, and I was like, I don't think my brain is made for this. I think that's a case where I just need more education. I need to take a class or workshop with an actual comic writer to figure out how they do it, because right now it is very, very confusing. I stick with novels because I just really love words. And I think about the this is going to be a wild inspiration source. Follow along with me. When I was 8 years old, I read Stephen King's It. I should not have read that at 8. We can get that out of the way, but I did, and I turned out fine. So whatever. But in particular, I have very vivid memories of being 8. It's late at night. I waited till my parents went to sleep and like read it with a flashlight under the covers. And the fact that there were words in that book that could put an image in my head that made me terrified and scared. And I've been chasing that high the rest of my life. And when I'm writing a book, that's what I'm thinking of is like, there's something about you don't get an image, but I have to put an image in your head that's why I stick with novels and short stories is I just love that challenge. And it's a very, very hard challenge because again, I find that I'm not as visually minded. Please don't ask me to draw anything. It'll be very bad. Like I just don't have the skills of translating things visually. So I like the challenge of, well, I can only stick with words. How do I get this image to ideally show up in someone else's head? Yes.
Oh, what has been the most memorable experience with fans at events like this?
I want you to know you said this, and I immediately thought of this 9-year-old kid I met the other day in New York named Ella, who is the most unhinged child I've ever met in my entire life, who read one of my middle grade novels, wrote fan fiction about how one of the characters needed to die, who was like the villain in the book, and I was like, "You're very creative." She had so many jokes, and she talked about how funny the book was, and the book wanted to make her funnier. And at one point, I was like, "You don't need the book to be funnier. You're so funny." And she looked at me dead in the eyes, and she said, "What's it like knowing I'm 9 years old and funnier than you'll ever be?" And I was like, "I hope you never change. I hope you're the same for the rest of your life. You're also terrifying." I have also been very lucky in that, and I was sort of given a heads up by other YA and middle grade authors before I got published, specifically queer YA middle grade authors, that sometimes your book will be the safest place in the world for them. And so a thing that happens way more than I ever thought it did is how many readers come out to me, and I'm the first person they come out to. So I was at Dragon Con last year here in Atlanta. You know, I live here in Atlanta, so I went to Dragon Con, but I was on staff. I was helping run social deduction games, and there was a kid who came to play in one of my games specifically because they loved my books. And then after they played this game, had a beautifully horrible time of chaos, and then afterwards just were like, "Oh, it was so cool to play in this game. Thank you so much." And I'm like, "Oh, that's wonderful." And they're like, "I really like your books too." And I was like very flattered. And then before they left the room, they just went, "Oh, so I want to tell you I'm gay." And then their eyes got really wide, and then they ran out of the room. And I was like, "Oh, drive by, come out. Cool, 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 cool. That's wild." They came back in later with their parent, and they had just come out to their dad. Oh, they had just come out to their dad, and their dad was like, "Oh, you know, my kid just told me that they came out to you. I think you're the first person they came out to." And they were all bashful and red or whatever like that. But they just said, like, "Thank you for making my kid feel safe," because then they told me. And I just like, you don't write a book thinking something like that is ever going to happen. But I think about it all the time, which is I hope that my books, as a wild of a journey as many of my books are, do feel like a safe place for people, and not just queer people, but people struggling particularly with mental illness. I write about mental illness a lot. You know, people struggling with issues of you know, their own culture. I write about how complicated it is to be an adopted person and not match the ethnicity and race of your adoptive parents, and what a weird experience that is as a child when the world is not prepared to answer questions about that. So yeah, but I think about that interaction a lot, a lot. Also, God, I love Atlanta. What a
Last
great
question.
place. Yes.
Given the current political climate, have you faced any backlash about your content in your writings when it comes to marketing towards young adults?
Every day. I've lost count of how many times I've been banned and censored, and in the hundreds of times. There's hundreds of schools that don't allow my books in them at all, that have been publicly taken off the shelves, like they're on lists that I know. There's a very quiet censorship happening here in this country too, where books are taken off the shelf, but no one ever finds out. And the only reason I found it is a librarian is emailing me and being like, "I'm so sorry. I just want to let you know, like, I'm under immense pressure, but I was told to take these books off. I don't know who else to tell because I don't want to lose my job, and I don't want a librarian to lose their job over me. Like, I'll be fine. Like, do not lose your job over me." But yeah, so all the time, I have had school visit appearances canceled. Is if a parent finds out I'm queer, if a parent finds out I'm not white, if a parent finds out any number of things. Yeah, I'm not, and been very explicitly told that's why the visit is being canceled. I had a visit canceled in the middle of it by a teacher who was convinced I was spreading pornography to kids, and I got escorted out by the cops. Yeah, so all the time, and I will say it does not deter me one bit. If anything, deep in my soul, I'm very petty. You are just making it worse. Like, I'm just gonna be worse.
Yes.
But yeah, and we also have to have conversations before a book is published with my publisher. Almost every book, do we want to reveal on the cover or on the back text that there are queer characters in this novel, that it deals with certain themes? Sometimes I say yes, sometimes I say no. Sometimes it's strategic there are certain books where I'm like, they're going to find out on page one. We might as well just tell everyone on the back cover. And it does mean that that book is not going to appear in certain libraries. It won't appear in certain classrooms. I also want to make sure that I have books that we often call our stealth, where you can't tell what's in the book, so that kids can safely read them without getting bullied, without being targeted. What a weird, when you write a book, that's not something you ever hope to have to think about. But yes, all of the time, I've been targeted by, what is it, Moms for Liberty, more times than I can count. I've had to move because they found my address. Like, it's it's wild. Again, I'm very petty though. It's not gonna stop me.